All right, hello everyone, and welcome to OpenHour. Thanks for joining us on the first Monday in February. I'm really excited for this event today. We're going to be talking about landfills, mapping, and monitoring. So we have a number of people on the call here, and then we also have people who are participating on the chat. So if you're watching, great, thanks for tuning in, and also thanks to all those who are live on the call. Feel free to write in anything on the chat, and I'll bring it back and forth between the chat room and the Google Hangout, so we'll all be able to participate. And I'm probably going to repeat myself on that for those who come later. And sorry, okay, great. I think we have an echo here. I just want to be a little bit careful that nobody's running the OpenHour who's like, don't watch it if you're on it. I got background noise. Okay. Great. So just a little bit about what spurred the idea and the topic today. As many of you know, we recently announced that the Public Lab Regional Barn Raising is going to be in Valverde, California. And one of the big draws for hosting the event in Valverde is that they're dealing with one of the largest landfills in the U.S. and some of the struggles that surround that. So we're kicking off this event with the idea of bringing that conversation into the public space on Public Lab. So we're going to host an open conversation about this and hopefully bring up some ideas, hear about some projects, and share. So I'm going to go down the line here, and just in terms of who I see on the live call, and we'll do a brief introduction. You want to start with your name, where you're calling in from, and what got you interested in joining this call today. So Peter, you're first on my list here.
Started on the right, huh? My name is Peter Anderson. I'm with the Center for a Competitive Waste Industry, and I've been working on opposing landfills for about 30 years. And I wound up, we can talk more about this later, focusing as the weakest link and the best politically to pursue is the methane emissions and the greenhouse effect. And the reason I got excited about the call, Stevie, is that I know all about the mechanics of why gas capture doesn't work, but with a huge wall of silence by the industry, it would be enormous. The fight would be enormously enhanced if we had actual field emissions to point to. It's always been tricky finding those because there's no smokestack and there's a non-point diffuse source. So I'm hopeful to find out and learn more about how the mapping kind of technologies and the infrared technologies and the computer technologies can all help in that regard.
Great. Thanks for joining. Pablo, you're next on the list here on the line. I think you're muted.
Hello. Yeah. So hello, I'm Pablo Rey. I'm calling from Bilbao, in Spain. I work in this association called Basurama. We study waste in all its possible forms, and I started studying landfills or waste accumulations and making panorama photos some time ago. And since 3-4 years ago, I started making photos of a landfill in Boston with Jeff. He's also in the call. And what I want to learn from this call is to share ideas of how to make better photos of landfill. What kind of photos can we do to make 3D models from there? Because landfill for us is like the hidden icon of consumption of the society, and where everything is going to be at the end. And so we like to document these places. So I don't know if I should extend more in detail or just leave it for later for the discussion.
Great, yeah. Let's go down the line and then we'll come back.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Nicholas?
Hello, my name is Nicholas. I'm a researcher at the Center for Urban Science and Progress here in New York. I focus mostly on urban waste, kind of looking at how cities generate waste and the processes of which that's managed. And I think in New York it was, for me, very interesting to find out about landfills from the point of view of cities exporting waste, but also New York has this interesting history of landfills in the city, and Fresh Kills being kind of one of the more infamous landfills. So kind of exploring those aspects and understanding how waste travels specifically, but also where it ends up. And a lot of my work is really trying to identify these final destinations of waste. So I'll share a couple projects likewise about that, which I'm excited to show.
Great. Matthew? Matthew, I think you're on or muted.
Hi, yeah, my video isn't quite up to snuff. I have been a trash diver dump fan for years. At one point in the town I spent high school and middle school in, Wellesley, Massachusetts, our town dump was once referred to as an stunning example of socialism in action in America by Boris Yeltsin, right at the end of his term. So I've been hanging out around landfills for a long time, and just glad to be here and hear everyone talking about them. Trash is near and dear to my heart.
Thanks, Matthew. Jeff? Jeff, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I've been looking for the button.
Okay.
I'm Jeff. I work with Public Lab and have done a lot of different landfill kite mapping over the years. Otherwise, haven't been deeply involved in it, but I'm interested in learning a lot on the call.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Gloria?
Hi, Gloria Horning. I live in Pensacola, Florida. I'm working with an African American community, actually 3 of them, that were nice homes at one time, and without any notification, now they're surrounded by 8 active landfills, 11 total. One is and they've been given fines, no fines, they've been given tickets, violations, 7 years, the same 17 violations, and nothing was ever cleared up. Our H2S level daily is around 50, rockets up to about 200 parts per billion at all 4 corners. It took me 2 years to get H2S devices in there. And now they're looking to reopen another one without any lining that goes right into, if you know anything about Florida, we're just one big aquaflow that feeds right into our bayous and then right into the ocean. And the toxicity of the water is off the charts as well. And so we're just poisoning this whole county. And then right above it, we have a coal ash, coal burning plant that has coal ash also going into the water. But these landfills have been, all these families have lived in these areas since the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It was the first African-American suburb before, integration, if it ever did take place, took place. They had their own community center, their own schools. In fact, the main landfill we're fighting was supposed to be their golf course. And they're being poisoned, and their homes are no longer viable. There's hundreds of diesel trucks going in and out of their neighborhoods every day, which also go by an elementary school and 2 high schools and 2 technical schools. There's a cement crushing landfill right next to the technical school. The children at the furthest end of this one landfill, they can't go out and play most of the time because of the H2S level. And we've got it closed, but the owner refuses to allow DEP, which is our Environmental Protection Agency, to go in and cover the trash. And it's hundreds of acres. And so everybody's breathing this. We've had a horrible winter with, well, not compared to all y'all, but with lots of rain. And so that's seeping right into the waterways and the drinking water. And I'm just, I'm a volunteer. I do this all on my own. to help these folks. And we're getting some action, but it's slow and painful. 2 other landfills that faced this in white neighborhoods were closed immediately, and homes were given H2S scrubbers for their air conditioning and heating, badges for them to know how much H2S they had engulfed in a week, and several other safety devices. And this community gets nothing, and they're dying. They're literally dying. We have a 7-year-old boy that has COPD. And that's, they're always saying, well, it's lifestyle, it's lifestyle. What kind of 7-year-old has a lifestyle? We can't keep the community center open because they prefer, they don't want anybody around the community center because it's less than 200 yards away from the one end of the site. And now we've got new borrow pits going in that are about 50 feet away from these people's homes that are shaking their homes, causing dust all over the place. And of course the diesel from the front loaders and all the trucks that are right in the backyards of these family homes. And it's a slow, painful process. And, they use GPS mapping, but the mapping that if you'll call up is old mapping, where there's these beautiful lush trees are no longer there. And they go, look, there is a buffer. There's all these trees. And I go, no, come out, and you'll find those trees are gone. And I finally got them to come out. I had a Latino press woman come out yesterday. And that's the biggest thing I try to do is keep it in the public eye. And it's wonderful to meet all of y'all. And we need help.
Yeah, wow, powerful stuff. Thanks for joining. Cindy, hello. Are you there, Cindy? I think you're muted.
Hi, sorry, difficult to touch the button on the phone. Hi, my name's Cindy. I'm calling in from the UK. I'm not particularly involved in any of these kinds of projects, but as Pablo put it, I'm very interested in this hidden icon of consumption that is landfills, but also I was very, very interested since the grassroots mapping forum issue on waste came out, and so I'm very keen to learn a bit more.
Great. Thanks, Cindy. Bernardo and friends? No, we can't hear you yet. No? Do you want to troubleshoot for a minute and I'll read a couple other intros I have here? Okay, great. Great. So we also have Andy Jacoby, who is from New Orleans and is an attorney and has worked on landfill issues in the past, who is joining us. And also Margie in the chat room has worked in New Orleans back in the 1980s and early 90s to bring recycling over the objections of waste haulers. Learned a lot about the mafia and has some background knowledge, but haven't worked in garbage much for a long time. So thanks for pinging in on the chat room. And again, if anybody is not in the live call, but interested in sharing ideas or questions, please post them in there. I know we have a number of viewers who are watching, so if you put your username in the chat room there, it should bring you right into the chat room, and I'll bring between the two. Thank you for sending those in, and if anybody else wants to write in an intro, I'll read it into the group here. Bernardo, did you get it up? Don't think so.
Well, since we have some folks on from New Orleans, I want to say that PBS did a pretty good piece on the Vietnamese fighting landfills from coming into their neighborhoods. It was on last night.
Wow, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it seems a number here. I think there was some good PR about this going out to the Gulf Coast region, so thanks. So let's just start talking a little bit about, we have a couple big questions here that people have obviously done different things with mapping and monitoring around landfills. But maybe if we start with mapping and projects that people have done around mapping or questions and comments, we can start there and then progress into more monitoring in general. So does anybody want to share a project that they have or questions that they have about mapping?
I just have a comment that North Carolina just put up a project about mapping all the landfills and all the minority communities. And if I could get my computer to work, I could send that to you. But it is on our Facebook page, which is Q Justice, CUEJUSTIC, or Justice Escambia. I did post it there about the fight. And you know, in South Carolina, North Carolina has had a long history of environmental racism, and it just continues to grow.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a question. Maybe this is more for Pablo or Jeff. Even when we're talking about mapping of landfills and maybe mapping of active landfills versus something that's been closed, I'm wondering because a lot of my experience of seeing accessing landfills is very troublesome, right? That they're dangerous places because of all the equipment moving, or likewise they're private, privately operated, and you are in a sense trespassing if you enter the landfill. What has been your experience of kind of accessing a landfill and kind of negotiating those issues?
Yeah, maybe I can share my experience with the Sogos landfill. I've been with Jeff, I think twice to that landfill with kites for kite mapping, and we've been always outside. We were lucky with the wind that was flying over the landfill. I'm gonna share the image of the landfill. You see the landfill here? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, this is where we were. You see my mouse, and this is the landfill. So we were lucky that we were outside all the time. The problem sometimes with the wind, we were about to lose one kite because it went down to the landfill, but then we were able to rescue it. I'm going to show you. This is the photo we did the composition. So our experience there is that from outside it's possible to do the mapping. You don't need even access. What would you say, Jeff?
Sorry, say that last part again.
That from outside it's possible to map in landfills if you're lucky that the roads or the paths around a landfill is you can access, so you don't have to be inside the landfill. It depends on the wind for balloon mapping and kite mapping.
Right.
Well, I was asking Jeff if he has something to add.
I don't, but I know there are a couple of other landfill mappers on here who might. And actually, I'll ping in real quick 2 more intros that Bernardo and your colleague here are calling in from NYC, and they're both doing their master's in design and urban ecologies and doing theses around waste. And then we have one more intro in the chat is from Margie, who as of today is the Delta Sierra Chapter Club rep, and will be working with anyone in Louisiana on working on these issues. That's who I have so far. Sorry, more on mapping, just so we know who's here.
Well, I have a question of Jeff, too, if the other question has been answered, has it?
Go for it.
And basically my question is, Jeff, there are no direct measurements of landfill emission.
Okay, try now.
So my question is, there are no direct measurements of landfill emissions. It's all been made up with smoke and mirrors until about the last 5 years. A very elaborate procedure has been going forward with using near-infrared scanning and algorithms to impute what the emissions rates are, but it's very expensive, and it is enormously subject to subjective adjustments to compensate for what the wind is bringing in. My question is, just in terms of the cameras that do near-infrared or methane detection, in terms of illustrating the volume without quantifying it, have you done any work like that with the infrared cameras to disclose where the big plumes exist over landfills, especially those using leachate recirculation?
My understanding was that you need like a thermal infrared camera to see methane, and maybe even a very specific type of thermal camera. I know Matthew has looked into this and the specific products that FLIR carries. There's one design for methane, I think.
Right.
I'm not familiar with much on near infrared photography and methane. That doesn't mean.
Jeff, the near-infrared is just the scanning technology that's being used. This doesn't. That was not a reference that referred to the simple cameras.
Oh, I see.
Hi,
Okay.
I just wanted to add. So the band in which methane is visible is 3,200 to 3,400 nanometers, which is what's called midwave infrared. And it's a very narrow band, so it's like 200. It's a 200 nanometer band that, and the FLIR cameras that operate in that range are about $90,000. There aren't that many sensors operating in that range. I wrote up a little note on some very sketchy ideas. I'm dropping into the notes here on trying to make a DIY infrared camera or something, but I don't think anyone has really done any development in that direction. It's quite a challenge to detect light in that range, and it's especially flummoxed and made very difficult by weapons export laws, because that's the range that cruise missiles cameras operate in. So there are all sorts of export restrictions and research restrictions on the use and dissemination of those technologies in the United States. So there's kind of a very difficult tie-in to military activity with trying to detect things in that band.
Yeah, I saw a lot of stuff online for that purpose with regard to natural gas pipeline leak detection. But getting the price down to a simple, affordable dollars is, as you say, is where I've been hoping to find something, and you're suggesting it may be very elusive.
Peter, I have a question too. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on maybe not the existence of methane in landfills, but the current. I get the sense that the way that landfills are being monitored is not substantial or not doesn't meet needs. I mean, I've seen the EPA has like the landfill methane program. Do they not monitor? Do they not monitor appropriately? Or I'm wondering if you could explain a little more of that.
The landfill rules for air were adopted in 1996 in 40 CFR Part 60 WWW, and the monitoring, they essentially abandoned all prescriptive rules and they made it performance-based, quote unquote, but when you look at the actual measurement they do, it is absolutely meaningless. It was basically copied and imported wholesale from the South Coast District's 1980s protocol, which was elicited to respond to legislative complaints about odor, and they found a correlation at the surface of landfills which did not have low permeable covers, which were just diffuse covers, between 500 parts per million at the surface of methane and odor complaints 500 or 1,000 feet away. And EPA, when it shifted at the last minute, because the rules started in '91 in its proposed form, and it started in a prescriptive format. Gingrich and the revolution, the Republican Revolution, occurred in November of 1994, And so they flipped over and said, let's abandon all this prescriptive stuff and make it whatever the industry wants, and we'll pretend it's performance. And that performance standard was supposedly stated or alleged to be something that defines a well-operated landfill. But it was nothing of the kind, number one. It was just a gross odor mitigation. And number two, it didn't apply to landfills which had geomembrane, those plastic sheets over them covers, because they only leak where there's a crack intermittently. They don't diffuse. And the measurements of 500 parts per million were taken at every 100 feet approximately on a grid. So the chance of spotting 10 or 12 big, large, high flux leaks was less than being stricken by a meteor. So it had no meaning. It was just garbage. And it's also, I should have mentioned, it's very easy to defeat by selecting the time of day and walking around the cracks. So the answer to your question is there is no monitoring. It's all done by first order decay models, which also are meaningless. And it's essentially a priesthood which wants to pretend this is a good thing when it's the worst thing. And if we can get that disclosed by, if there was a $5,000 or $2,000 camera, which with algorithms for the computer display would show huge green plumes over these landfills they're claiming are 99% effective at gas capture, that would blow them away. And if we did blow them away, where you would head after a longer discussion, which I don't want to monopolize, would be it's impossible to safely manage landfills with organic material that decompose. And I think most of us here are very much focused on zero waste. And so the fight on climate change also, if we were to win it, is a pathway to the next huge tier to getting to zero waste. Because once you take organics out, you now have moved to 70 or 80 or 85% diversion.
Well, our biggest issue is H2S. And the H2S level, state regulations say 70 ppb at the fence. But our Department of Health says no, it's 200. 70, and I'm quoting, is just a suggestion. And I said, well, is 55 miles an hour just a suggestion? You know, and we're getting readings of 200 parts per billion, hundreds of yards away from the landfill, not even at the fence line. And then their argument is, well, it's not for 8 hours a day. Well, OSHA says it shouldn't even be for workers more than 30 minutes or an hour, and these people live there 24/7.
Yeah, you don't have a technical fight, you have a political fight. They're going to, no matter what you say, they're going to screw you with mumbo jumbo unless you make it a political challenge they can't avoid.
Does anybody else have experience with monitoring different parameters around landfills or other things to share in of ideas that people can do when this is in your backyard?
Yeah, I would like to add one research note that I think Pat Coyle, he used our photos from the landfill, from the Saugus landfill, to make a 3D model. And I think that would be another interesting way of monitoring the volume of the landfill, of the waste piles, by 3D reconstruction. I'm really looking forward a solution, that a free software that works in Linux for this. So it's also a question. He was using AutoCAD 3D. What was it? AutoCAD. I will share the link now. He was using. What was it? AutoCAD, Autodesk 123D CADs web tool, and it was great when he did. But I'm looking forward other free software tools for doing this.
So I just shared one of the notes I found of estimating waste in landfills, weight and size, the wiki. If there's another research note or anything that you find that's useful, go ahead and post it in there, and I'll share it over between the two.
Can I ask a question for Nick?
Sure.
I saw your project, Landfill Hunter. I thought it was pretty interesting because having done work previously trying to find out the landfills that receive waste from New York City, it's pretty difficult to find publicly available information on landfills or even their locations. So I wanted to hear more about how you go about doing this project and at which stage is it?
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, the project you're referring to, I have a quick slide. I'll just give an overview of the project, and then maybe I can talk a little more in detail about it. It was a project exactly that I didn't have a lot of information about landfills. I couldn't find anything, but what I did find was from the EPA. And what I wanted to do is really set up a way that people could contribute data to this data set from the EPA in order to kind of analyze landfills more, but also explore them and let people explore them on their own. This is the project, which is live. And basically what I've done is I plot each of those coordinates from an EPA database that's supposed to represent a landfill. And the first thing is it's supposed to represent a landfill. I've often found that those coordinates are not necessarily correct. But then I ask people to go through and kind of explore that area. These are kind of some examples of things that I've seen. But to find that landfill and then to outline the landfill and kind of create this this vector or this data point, which then can be used after the fact. And I think it's kind of interesting to think of it simply that way, but then to also think about the other data that could then be added on to that as well. So it was, the project is in mid-progress, I would say. I'm still trying to collect all the data. Every week or so I go in and outline a few landfills myself, but slowly people are kind of joining into the project. And the one nice thing I like about the project too, and crowdcrafting in general, is that it's all open source. So all the data is there. Anyone can kind of go and access it and see what's been developed. And I think one of the original goals I had of the project was to kind of come back to all these specific issues of neighborhoods or of communities that are having landfills set up, and to start maybe to have a foundation to quantify those. And are they happening in other areas? One of the things I kept seeing is that it's really common that there are communities across the street from landfills. And yes, I think I understood that. I've known kind of these historical environmental issues and kind of environmental justice issues, but to actually see how frequent it was kind of surprising to me. And the project is very much an approach to kind of quantify those and build this community around landfills and discovering landfills. I hope that answers your question. Feel free to check out the projects, send me feedback or whatever. Use the data, please. I'm curious to see how it moves forward on its own as well.
I'm going to bring in
Let me just add, Stevie, that a good source, if people are looking to map and then tie monitoring or quasi-monitoring data in with the mapping, is the EPA's greenhouse gas reporting standard rule, which I'm trying to find a way to do this. Is this showing up? It's 40 CFR Part 98, Part Subpart HH, and if you go to the title, EPA Greenhouse Gas Reporting Rule for MSW landfills, in Google, it'll take you to the data part of that, and there's all kinds of ways of downloading their database from which you can do all kinds of things, at least for the top largest 1,000, not for all the small landfills, and make a comprehensive map. So if you're not aware of that, you might want to take a look at that.
And I'm going to bring over a couple comments that we're getting in the chat room. Nick, there was a request if you would share your webpage on this chat here, or I can bring it over to the other one. And also, Margie in Louisiana has said that a number of the landfills in the area here are on previously wetland areas. They fill up swamps and make it useful. Over the years, there have been a lot of leaks into surrounding waterways. General Henry, local hero, has been leading the battle to keep the government from building schools on old closed landfills. but there are several schools in New Orleans area and elsewhere in Louisiana that are built on old landfills and highly toxic spots for schools. So just bringing that comment in over as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's really fascinating. It's a mentality that's existed for hundreds of years. Even in New York, I think most of New York is founded on kind of these old landfills. And granted, things have certainly changed, that the landfills she's referring to have more toxicity. But I think this kind of mentality of let's reclaim land and let's fill it with dirt, I think is misplaced. And I don't know, I think it is a really interesting issue to bring out. So thanks for the comment.
I have one question.
Pablo?
If you have, no, Nicolas, I mean, I find your point really interesting. My question is, if you have looked in the data that OpenStreetMap has about landfills, have you compared your data with the other to see if you are like filling some gaps that you might help the OpenStreetMap community, or you might get help from the OpenStreetMap community? How is that?
No, actually, I didn't realize there was OpenStreetMap data about landfills. I'd be really excited to do exactly that comparison. If you could maybe share a link to that or some way that I could access that would be great.
Yeah, I will.
I'm just going to throw out there for those watching, we have 2 spots open on the live call if anybody wants to click the link and join us here as well. So what are, I'm interested in bringing up some tools potentially that people have seen other communities use about, and you know, outside of just landfill monitoring and mapping, a lot of times when landfills come in, it's like it starts with one landfill and then suddenly it's expanding and it's growing and it's taking in more things than it was originally planning to do. And I was wondering if anybody could share stories of how you've heard other people handling this situation, if there's any tools or resources that community groups can use as these problems of landfill growth and expansion bloom, continue.
Direct action. 1, going to your county commission or parish president meetings. 2, one of the things that we're doing, we adopted the color orange, so every time we go anywhere that we're going to talk about our landfill, we're all wearing orange. I just finished building 12 orange crosses to put around in the community that say landfills are killing us. So people from the outside can see it. It's the biggest thing to do is to get publicity on it and get people talking about it and getting people to join you. But what you have to understand with the community I'm working with, they're an elderly community, and you know, they have grandchildren and such, but it's hard for them to attend nightly meetings. So you need to build a coalition that'll help you and be there for you, and then if they're working on an issue, be there for them. But it's a day in and day out fight for justice, and I heard, I think it was John saying, yes, this is a political issue. All of this, dirt and oil and anything you want, to put in the environmental definition, which includes anywhere we live, work, and play, is political. I mean, period. And we've got to get those politicians out and having to stop, voting for the lessed crooked one. And it's boots on the ground. And it's people who can go to the Capitol, Baton Rouge, Tallahassee. And that's what it's going to take, direct action, in my opinion.
On another, outside of people's direct actions and everything, I guess this made me think a little bit about the other trajectory here of after landfills come in and it's closed, things that people can do, which reminds me, Nick, of your project of mapping the invasive species and like the idea of remediation in terms of, you know, what are the things that we can do that people have done, what has worked and what hasn't worked, and what, as landfills are closing, should people push for?
You know, I think that's also a really interesting question too. You know, what happens to landfills when they close, and what are their lives afterwards? And I think there have been, you know, I've heard stories and just chatting with people of stories such as, you know, landfills being turned into ski slopes in areas that don't have hills, or, you know, also here in New York, Fresh Kills landfill, which was closed in 2001. Is being converted into a park, into a city park, and it's kind of an ongoing project, a 30-year project to actually do that conversion and to really try and reclaim the land. From my experience with that, one of the things that we were doing in actually mapping the landfill was trying to map a plant species which was invasive, which was coming into the landfill and was first of all creating a monoculture. It was killing off all of their plants around, and second of all, there was thought that it could potentially be dangerous for the cap of the landfill, that the type of Phragmites which was growing is really invasive, and we could even see it growing through the cement roads in the landfill, so there was kind of that concern. And we were essentially using balloons to kind of map out where the Phragmites was growing based on the color of the Phragmites, which was different than the other plants in the area. And that's something that project was being passed on to the Parks Department here in New York and the Sanitation Department to really try and engage in that remediation process and trying to mitigate the Phragmites invasion.
Another topic I think it's interesting is transfer stations. So transfer stations are another part of the waste infrastructure, and for those that are not familiar with them, they're consolidation centers for trash. So trash that's collected in cities get consolidated into these buildings, and then they get loaded into bigger trucks to be taken to landfills in other places. New York City has many of these because New York City doesn't have any landfills in it anymore. So that's something I've also been trying to map out in the past semester, because I think there are a lot of discussions in New York City at least about the siting of these facilities and which communities bear the burden of having these facilities in their neighborhoods, and the truck traffics and the pollution, et cetera, et cetera.
We've done road counts. We've got over 250 trucks going in and out at both ends, because there's only two ways in and out. They go directly past the homes and the school. And I'm talking 25 feet from these homes, going through their neighborhood every day. We're in a health crisis over here, as well as Alabama is, and I know New Orleans is as well. I'm originally from Lafayette, very aware of what's going on over there. I came to Pensacola because of the BP oil spill, and we've got some of that dump in our landfills that are surrounding these communities. I mean, it will be a Superfund site before this is all over, I guarantee it. The whole area. And that'll be the removal of a beautiful multi-million-dollar community center, 2 high schools, 1 middle school, an elementary school. I couldn't even tell you how many churches, all because rules and regulations were not enforced, because the people that are being impacted by this are people of color and people of low social and economic means. And that's what we have to fight for, is justice for these people and others all across, in North Carolina as well. It's just unbelievable to me in a society that we would kill people like this. This is a Black Lives Matter movement that is a slow death for these people.
I'm going to bring in a comment from Margie on the chat, the IRC chat, that she says, my frustration is that we're still setting in new landfills and transfer stations with no recycling put in place to accompany them. Good legislation would include wording that all new waste handling facilities must have recycling operations. Another comment in from Dan Beavers is, Peter, are the landfills that capture methane any better at mitigating H2S emissions?
That's a good question. I never looked at that. You would generally, generally you would think that it would capture everything that is captured, and it would, except though the fact is that the hydrogen sulfide emissions are so detectable by odor at such low levels. If you have a problem like with drywall that's causing substantial emissions, they're not going to. It's never going to be that effective that it'll prevent odor problems. So I think you have to have a combination of good gas capture, which is a oxymoron, an area with low moisture, a semi-arid area to avoid a lot of generation, and especially an absence of problem materials would be required. But just looking unilaterally at just one gas capture by itself would not be sufficient.
And let me follow up. We've got those rules and regulations. They're not being enforced.
Gloria, I have a question for you. The landfills in your neighborhood, are those local landfills, or locally operated, or are they regional landfills?
Locally owned and operated. Well, except for one. One is owned by Waste Management out of Alabama. And they are the ones that are technically closed right now, but still have a permit, but they still have containers full of BP waste in their borrow pit. Now they're asking to be reopened as a C and D pit, but they haven't addressed the toxic water runoff that is still coming off their landfill into the bayou and into the lake, and then further into Perdido Key, which goes into the Gulf.
And you need to also be aware, because right now, with the North Carolina DEP order to Duke to close its open pit coal ash dumps, all the big companies around the South are chafing for that business and reopening and expanding sites galore without regard to the people, so long as the surrounding community is poor and disadvantaged.
And tomorrow night we've got coal ash stories here with some of the speakers, and we have a coal burning facility that's right on the Escambia River that has their holding pond that is right next to the bayou that runs through the campus I teach at. And they had 750 tons of coal ash go into that bayou, and didn't tell anybody except that the bayou was closed because of bacteria.
Wow.
I'm not making this stuff up. This is like, you know, it reminds me of Bush and Clinton in 2000. It's just mind-boggling when these officials go, oh yeah, but it's really not a problem. These are only suggestions, and can't get a lawyer to touch it. So now I'm asking friends of mine in Tallahassee to find me lawyers that will, instead of a class action suit, go through malfeasance because they're not enforcing the rules and regulations that are in place.
I just want to ping in here. I know that we have a couple people on bringing up enforcing and law. A couple people on who have experience on this, bringing lawsuit against landfill and companies. And if you're on the other chat, would love to hear some of your comments or experiences. Also, I have 2 slots open on the live call if you want to jump in and talk a little bit about it. It would be great to hear from you, I guess from the other side as well, on how this works out for you. So we're getting a couple books and references shared over. I'm just going to cross those on over between the 2 chat rooms here. So I was wondering, it kind of struck my mind, Gloria, when you said that, because landfill regulations, I think of land policies and things like that, but when you're talking about dumping into a waterway, you run into Clean Water Act problems.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have any experience working this from the water angle.
Well, that's another step that we're going to work on next. But I can only do so much, and I've been pretty much a party of one. And, I still have to work for a living. And, I go down the list. I got some real good feedback this weekend on a tour I gave to the Latino press and to a couple of scientists who are going to help me with some more testing. That takes money. We've got the testing. We've got the reports. It's clearly, a Clean Water and Clean Air Act violation, but we can't get anybody to enforce it. EPA Region 4, knows me by my first name and knows another woman out there by their first name, and they just stick their nose up at us. And, that 2.5 years now, doing what I can, and I'm going to continue to reach out and do what I can. I'm so appreciative of this information. I'm getting a drone, so I'm going to map that area, and I'll be able to monitor it better. And I don't even live in this neighborhood. But I'm there every weekend. Everybody knows me. Things like this have to be stopped, not just here in Pensacola, Alabama, North Carolina, everywhere. Flint just, it makes me cringe. We're killing less influent people and killing the earth at the same time. And that's what I try to explain to the people at the county commission office. I said, these landfills aren't just their issue. This is your drinking water, too. This is why your Perdido Key is always getting reports that don't go fishing, don't go swimming in Perdido Key because of bacteria or something got accidentally dumped into the waterway way up where the landfills are and then coming down to their neighborhood. And that's the only time they really pay attention to it. And I think that's all over the United States that we have to understand. Pollution doesn't have any boundaries. It doesn't know what color or race you are or how much money you make. And now with Florida, we're going to allow fracking. What a good thing to do in Florida when we live on an aquifloor, And most of the counties have banned fracking, but the governor said, too bad. You can't. We're going to frack. So, these issues are truly snowballs that a lot of people don't see them coming. And people like us and others, try to tell them, but they just think we're crazy or no, that's not going to happen. And it's gonna. So it's very sad to me.
I have another sort of question. Maybe this is more for Pablo again, or maybe Matt. And maybe to zoom out from landfills, but maybe to look at the broader picture of waste in general and our consumption. I think that's what Pablo kind of touched on. I'm curious. How do we? Let's see. What are the routes? How do we go about solving an issue like that? Landfills, I always think, are a result of a greater problem, right? They are kind of the result, the outcome of something bigger. And I'm wondering how to really maybe even address that bigger problem straight on. I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts on that. I know it's a really big topic or broad question, but maybe.
Well, I will mention these waste-to-energy plants that are usually or often sold as the solution, like to burn waste. And as many environmentalists say, this is not the solution, just to burn waste. As we haven't talked about it, I think it's great to mention that. there's a huge movement opposing incinerator plants. And of course, always dealing with waste, the same thing is talking about consumption, about production of waste, not so much about recycling or where it goes. So, I mean, I'm not inventing anything, it's just the typical the reduced part of the three recycling, so reducing, recycling, and repairing, and everything comes before recycling. So that's, for me,
We
that's
just
like
closed our one and only recycling plant.
Yeah, I would say for some historical to look at this in a historical context, which is that municipal waste pickup, at least in the United States, is very new. It's a pretty new phenomenon. It started in the 1950s and 60s, and it has been the big driver of disposable packaging. Is municipal waste pickup. Municipal waste pickup, well, famously in the 1950s, the head of the American Plastics Business Board had said, you know, our future is in the trash can. And like the plastics industry quite literally positioned themselves for a future in the trash can of disposable packaging. So this is kind of we've built a system of waste and a system built around wasting things. So changing that system towards containers and packaging that are not designed for disposal is, yeah, I think the crucial thing. Just as Pablo said, it's the reduce and the reuse side of things, not the recycle side of things, that we need to focus on.
In South Africa, if you have to use a plastic bag, they charge you for it. They'll refund it if you bring it back. I think that's brilliant. But, you know, it was the line in The Graduate. Just remember one thing, son, plastic. Invest in plastic.
But there's another point of view, though, I think it needs to be understood, is it can be conceptually true that this or this is the nub of the issue. But unless you can palpably get your arms around it, number one, and number two, have the political strength to apply the pressure where it's required, it means nothing. So I think my thought is it's more important to find out of the important things, where can we make an impact, as opposed to what conceptually or theoretically is the most important thing.
I want to funnel a question over that we're getting from the chat room, and that's from Dan Beavers, who wants to hear about H2S sensors, cost, usage, etc. So if anybody has experience or ideas around H2S sensing, we're getting that question.
Well, there were 4 that were placed at the Softly landfill, which was in a white neighborhood, and we were able to get one of those posted at our community center, and then finally pressured them into bringing 3 more in. They run about 10 grand, but they're constant. You can have instant feed, and you know, every week I have access to the points, and I put it directly up on our Facebook page. But we have them located, you know, and stationary. But even the stationary ones we have, you can you can take them out and run them along a fence line or anything like that and get readings. They don't have to stay stationary. And for the life of me, I just forgot their name. Oops. But they're handheld devices but we have them in a stationary box. And only one of them actually carries the wind speed, and you know, you can calculate that from the 4 points because we're going north, south, east, and west. And that's the one that has the horn on it too that you can't hear, even if you're underneath it when the level gets above 70 ppb. You can get your own for about $500 that you can wear around if you're going to be around landfills, and they're rechargeable. So yeah, that's about what they run. And the tape, it's like a metal tape that goes in it that gives you a reading, and they're connected to computers that read through the Wi-Fi system out to a computer.
And just on that topic as well, for the cost of them, I think one of the things that we've been interested for a while in the public lab community is low-cost H2S sensing. And if anyone's interested, the July 28th Open Hour was, it's entitled Open Air and Open Air projects. And we had a few people on who were talking about projects that surround low-cost H2S sensing. Mm-hmm. And they, in that project, they were talking about using sorry, Jeff or Matthew, if you want to ping in here, the photo paper as a way to sort of detect H2S in the air. So you can refer to that, or you can also search for that on Public Lab, and you can read about some of those projects that people have done with low-cost sensing on that.
I just remembered their names are Jerome's.
Jerome's, like J?
Yes.
Okay. So I do want to, I always try to ping in on the hour. We have reached the open hour, so I want to thank anyone who is going to leave us at this point, and thank you for your time and your input and for coming. For anyone who wants to stay on, I'll leave the line open and we can continue a conversation, but thanks to all for coming.
Well, thank you. I do have to sign off. Thanks for everyone for what they do and the information I received today. Hope to speak with y'all soon and maybe even get in a room together.
Great.
Take
and
care.
I will collect all the links and things that people will share, and all the open hours are saved. And I put the links that everybody shares below the open hour. So feel free to come back and visit, and all the resources will be compiled there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stevie.
Did anybody else have any questions, ideas, things to share? I'm getting a couple links. Oops, if I can get my computer to stop.
Yeah, I would like to. Yeah, one book I wanted to share with you is this Recycling Reconsidered. Just talking about the recycling business in the U.S. It's a really interesting story to talk about why we're recycling bottles but not textiles, for example. It's a really interesting book.
What's the name of the book?
Recycling Reconsidered. I published it on the chat. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very good book, and the author Samantha McBride, she talks a lot about composting as a viable alternative to the issues generated by landfilling and also by recycling. And I think composting is something that has a lot of potential both in neighborhood, smaller scale projects, and maybe even large scale projects.
And also another link is the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers. It's like how the informal economy is able to separate the waste in much better ways and much finer ways than the industry. This is I participate in this international network, which is globalrec.org. I will share the link. And I think it's interesting also to see how smaller scale projects also play an important role in the informal economy.
Anyone else? Well, I have to say this has been probably one of the largest, best attended open hours that we've hosted. I've been watching the numbers of people just watching as well. So this is a really hot topic. And, you know, if you have ideas, if you have other things, resources to share, send them out to the Public Lab Google groups, post out a research note, and let's keep this conversation going.
Great, thank you, Stevie.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Everybody have a good day.
Bye.